evening, Sumter School District boys and girls, and welcome to another evening of Reading with the Superintendent. As promised, we've extended our opportunities to share readings with you in the evening beyond the end of the school year. And the reason why is because I have so many important people who would like to read to you. And we're going to introduce one to you now, Mrs. Jennifer Howard. Well, good evening, Mrs. Howard. How are you?
Good evening, Doc. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me.
I am so excited.
And likewise. Why don't you take the opportunity to introduce yourself to those of our audience viewers who don't know who you are?
To those that don't know who I am Mrs. Jennifer Howard, and I am the magnificent principal of Rafton Creek Elementary School in the big town of Rembrandt. We are little, but we are big at heart, and we enjoy everything that we do here at the Creek.
And let me just tell you, I appreciate you and your staff and your leadership at the Creek. And thank you for all that you do. Do you have a special message for your little people?
I do, for all of the boys and girls at Rafton Creek and also in the whole Sumter School District. We are now out for the summer, but remember, reading is fundamental. Make sure that you continue to read during the summer so that you won't get that summer lag when we come back, and you'll be ready for more excitement in the new school year.
Absolutely. Well said, Mrs. Howard, well said. So I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. Before we get into reading and have fun, as we always do while we're reading, why don't you introduce the book that we're reading today?
The book that we're reading today, the title is Granddaddy's Turn, A Journey to the Ballot Box. As you know, we have an election coming up, and everybody now has the right to vote. But this gives us a little bit of history about voting and an adventure that a grandfather had when it comes to voting. The author of this book is Mr. Michael S. Bandy and Eric Steen, and our illustrator is James E. Ransom.
Well put. So before we get into the content of this reading, let me make sure I have everyone's attention. So 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me.
1, 2, all eyes on you.
You got it. Mrs. Howard, let's take it away.
Okay, as we begin our journey today, let's see if I can use my teacher skills that I learned a long time ago. Where we live, I didn't need an alarm clock. I woke up with the cock-a-doodle-doo of my pet rooster and the chugga-chugga-chugga of my granddaddy's tractor. Hurry up, boy, he would shout. I'm coming, Granddaddy, I'd say.
You know, Mrs. Howard, you did a really good job with that rooster sound. You did a really good job.
I am a country girl, so I grew up with roosters.
I didn't hear my first live rooster until the beginning of the school year, and I'll tell you about that one morning.
We'll have to talk about that later.
We will. We got work to do, my granddaddy would say. Hard work will keep you out of trouble. I guess he figured I was going to get in a whole passel of trouble because he sure gave me lots of chores. We fed the animals, we milked the cows, and we worked in the fields.
Have you ever had the opportunity to work in the fields?
I wouldn't say that I literally worked in the fields, but I can say that my great aunt and uncle right here in Sumter had a farm, and when we visited, I touched an animal. I may have touched a veggie. I don't know if that is considered.
Yeah. Not quite. I've had the opportunity of working in tobacco, cucumbers, and tomatoes.
Oh, so my touching them doesn't count?
Just a little bit, not quite.
Okay. Because you couldn't tell me that I didn't do something special.
You did. Because a lot of people don't get the opportunity to even visit a farm to know what happens on the farm.
Well, I did visit. I visited.
So you have an idea of what actually happens on the farm.
I do.
My granddaddy was a big, strong man who always said he didn't take nothing off of nobody. He could do anything. He He could plow the fields, chop wood, and dig fence posts, all without breaking a sweat. Not like me. Sometimes when I did my chores, I made so much sweat, it was like I was raining.
Wow, that's a lot of sweat.
Yeah, when you think about rain and sweat, it's a whole lot.
It is, it is. We worked together a lot, but we played a lot too. We really loved to go fishing. Sometimes I would complain when I didn't get a bite right away, but my granddaddy always said, patience, son, patience. Have you ever been fishing, Mrs. Howard?
I have. I even owned a boat at one time. The main thing I like that Grandpa said was about patience. Patience is a virtue. We cannot hurry through everything that we do. We must be patient and wait.
We must be patient and wait. And so I've also been fishing. I didn't catch
You didn't catch anything?
Didn't catch anything. No, my uncle took.
You'll have to go fishing. Would you like to go fishing?
Let's keep reading.
I will take that as a positive no. One morning while we were eating breakfast, my grandmother brought out a surprise for my granddaddy. She had cleaned and ironed his suit. I didn't understand that since he only wore his suit to church, and it wasn't a church day. It's our time. You got to look your best, my grandma said. My granddaddy was so excited, he leaped up from the table and gave her a big hug. What's going on, Granddaddy? I asked. You'll see, he said with a big beaming smile. I didn't like neckties too much, but since my granddaddy was wearing one, I guess I was too. Y'all be careful now, my grandma said, and don't forget to take pictures, she said as she handed my granddaddy the camera. Oh, this is going to be special because, you know, in the South, we don't put on our Sunday best until something good is happening.
Yeah, I would agree. And even though I wasn't here in the South, having a grandmother who was from the South, the same rule applied.
Oh, yes. When it was time for the big things to happen, you knew it was time to dress in your Sunday's best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We walked and walked. It seemed like 100 miles. I asked my granddaddy where we were going again. Patience, son, patience. He reminded me with a smile. Oh boy, I thought, we must be going to the county fair. I walked faster. I couldn't wait to get there. I could almost hear the music and smell the barbecue. So, Mrs. Howard, let me ask you a question. What's your favorite meal when you go to the county fair?
It has to be, let me think. I like me a good sausage dog and the funnel cakes.
Okay. Mine is cotton candy.
Oh, wow. Where are all the rising animals? I asked my granddaddy. He laughed and said, what are you talking about, son? I thought we were going to the county fair, I said. Look around, my granddaddy said. This is better than any old fair. Then I saw the vote here sign and shouted to my granddaddy, are you voting today? Yes, I am, my granddaddy proudly replied.
Wow. I remember the first time I went to the voting booth. It was with my grandma. And at that point, she taught me a very special message, but we'll talk about that a little later.
Yes, it was a very special time, especially if it was back in the 60s and the 70s.
Nobody in my family had ever voted before. Where we lived, some people were allowed to vote and some people were not. I never knew anyone who had voted before, but I heard my teacher say that some new laws had changed all that. I hoped that was true because I didn't want us to get in trouble. It's like we were standing in line forever. And every time we seemed to get a little closer, someone would cut in line in front of us. That's just how things work where we lived. It didn't seem to bother my granddaddy, though. He said, patience, son. Takes patience to get what you've got coming to you. The advice he's being given from his granddad.
Yes, because sometimes people do things that are not nice. And sometimes when we go to stores, we have people that get in front of us and we get upset. But we never know. They may have an emergency and they need to know, and then they may just be mean. We never know. But we must always be patient and wait our turn, because good things come to those who wait.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When we finally got to the front of the line, my granddad had proudly signed a paper and was handed a ballot. He clutched the ballot to his chest and said, son, this is the happiest day of my life. I took the camera from him and said, smile, granddaddy. Now come on, let's go vote, he said.
That's monumental.
What an opportunity.
Absolutely. But before we could even walk to the voting booth, a deputy stopped us and asked my granddaddy, what are you doing, Uncle? Where we lived, if the white folks didn't know your name, they usually called you either Uncle or George, or Auntie if you were a lady. I'm voting today, sir, my granddaddy replied. The deputy got out a big, thick book and slammed it on the table. He opened it to a page with words that looked longer than crawfish. Can you read this, Uncle? The deputy asked. My granddaddy just stared at the pages and shook his head. No, sir, I can't, he replied. The deputy slammed the book shut, saying, well, Uncle, if you can't read this, you can't vote. He tore up my granddaddy's ballot and threw it on the ground. Pretty sure that man wasn't playing by the rules, but he was in charge. I could see my granddaddy was mad.
Wow, what an experience to wait all of this time to be able to vote and then turn down when you get to the actual voting. As we headed back down the road towards home, my granddaddy didn't say a word, but I saw something that I'd never seen before. My big, strong granddaddy had tears in his eyes. Don't worry, granddaddy, I'll vote for you one day, I said to him. Wow, seeing the disappointment in somebody that you really love not being able to do what they've waited a lifetime to do.
Absolutely. So granddaddy passed away before he ever got a chance to vote. I never forgot that day he tried to vote. My granddaddy was so mad, he might have lost his temper, but he knew better than me how important that day was. Even though it wasn't his time to vote that day, he looked to the future. He has a picture of his granddaddy to keep that memory, huh?
Yes, he does. When I went to vote for the first time, I remember what my granddaddy always said. Patience, son, patience. He was right. The day finally came, and I knew that, just like my granddaddy, I would never take it for granted.
Yeah. Never take it for granted. With his picture in my hand, I put my ballot in the box, smiled, and said to myself, now it's granddaddy's turn. Wow.
What a powerful story.
Ms. Howard,
yes.
why don't you read the last page that gives a historical perspective to our youth who are watching as it pertains to voting.
It says, thanks to Spencer Humphrey, Ed Lopowitz, Nicole Raymond, Karen Lotz, and Congressman John Lewis, for my uncle Phil Steen. Thank you to the generation that walked rode, protested, sat in, and opened all the doors for my generation. In the 1950s and the 1960s, the civil rights movement helped dismantle the walls of racial segregation in the United States brick by brick. From interstate transportation to access to education to the desegregation of public accommodations and housings. The last vestige of resistance in this struggle was voting rights. The pro-segregation establishment clearly understood the power of the vote. The concept of one person, one vote has always been the key to significant political and social change, a change that segregationists were not going to concede without a fight. Politically sanctioned nullification of voters' rights was a commonplace in Alabama and many other southern states. African American citizens were subject to various unethical methods of voter suppression, including poll taxes and birth record challenges. Perhaps the worst of these tests were the so-called literacy tests. These tests were usually administered by the polling officials towards any individual who they considered undesirable. The potential voter was handed a booklet or pamphlet, which often consisted of a difficult Elizabethan text or complex legal language. The voter was asked to read the document aloud and to explain in detail to the polling official what the passage meant. If the explanation was not deemed up to par, the voter was dismissed and not allowed to vote. Through these tactics, thousands of individuals were denied their constitutional right to vote. Many were also harassed or hurt, and some were even killed. Fortunately, these practices were ultimately stopped with the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, landmark legislation signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson.
I think that's a historical piece that needs to be communicated, and that's why I asked you to read that, Mrs. Howard. Not only is it informative, but it actually helps give context to the book that we just read, and it shows the importance of exercising your right to vote. You're
and
right.
Also, as a part of our Black history, I was able to actually take one of those tests.
Wow, okay.
And what it was, certain ones, we had one that was different. It wasn't the reading one, but you had to identify certain things, and it would tell you read the first sentence, what was the third word, certain things in it, and it was left up to the person that was grading it to say whether you passed or not. And then it happened to be a timed test.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, I'm glad that in this book, he was able to help forge ahead with Granddaddy's dream with the right to vote, and that he exercised that right and was able to do so. While this book is a little unusual from some of the books that we've read in the past, I know that it is one of learning. And so I thank you for selecting this book and choosing this book for us to educate our youth as they are looking at this evening of reading with the superintendent. And I want to thank you, Mrs. Howard, for all that you do for our children at Rafting Creek and here in the Sumter School District. So thank you for your continued leadership. I hope that you have a great summer, and I hope that your kids come back ready to learn in the fall, and that they continue to exercise their abilities to enhance their reading while they continue to engage their minds. So thank you for the advice this evening. And I hope again that our children come back ready to learn and in a healthy capacity.
Yes, and remember, boys and girls, read, read, read to keep your mind active.
Absolutely. Mrs. Howard, thank you again. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in to another evening of Reading with the Superintendent. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Mrs. Howard. Thank you to our...
Thanks. Have a great night, everyone. Remember, read, read, read.
Read, read, read.